And oh, thank you, Dina. And so Jaslika has a consulting, a foundation, and what they call Modus Designs Lab. Our second presenter is Ernest Onguko, who is a program manager at Jaslika and has a master's degree in mobile telecommunications and innovation from Strathmore University. First ventured into educational research as an intern at WERK, working closely with Dr. Wamahiu on various projects, both in WERK and Jaslika. And he has risen up the ranks and now occupying a senior position at the organization. So he also has, he's a certified Max QDA trainer. I hope I mentioned it correctly. So those are our two presenters for today. We have both WERK and Jaslika working on this together. WERK usually runs a seminar series monthly, and we hope that this tempo will continue. And this is a start from this part. This year, I think we haven't had one, but we hope to have several of them continuing, and we are really happy to get started with issues of gender and girls' education. So over to you, Dr. Wamahiu, to take us through.
Thank you so much, Winnie, for that introduction. And let me also recognize Dr. Mary Otieno and other WERK chair. I don't know whether Dr. Irene is present yet, but I've seen a former WERK chair here, that is Felicita Juguna. So I'd like to recognize her here, and some founding members of WERK as well, because WERK precedes Jaslika. So Dr. Karen Hyde has joined us all the way from London. And not to forget Dr. Margaret Oloko, who welcomed us as the co-chair of WERK. I would also like to recognize friends and colleagues from Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and beyond, which is, I've seen Laura, my former colleague, from joining all the way from Finland. So hi, Laura, and others who said they would be joining. And the young people, I'm so happy to see so many of the young people from Yatta, Nyeri, and Nairobi, both Jaslika and non-Jaslika, because I think that is our future, our present and the future. The young people are our present and future. I know there's some study participants who had also said they would be joining in if they're here. I'd like to recognize you for so generously making the time to talk to us, because if you had not talked to us, we would not be here today to present a report. And at the same time, I would like to recognize the intergenerational multi-country team of researchers. From Jaslika, I would like you to raise your hands. Wangui, my co-researcher, of course, Ernest, and other young people, Mary, Salome, who came in at the tail end, but Jasmine, the very many, Neil, I can see Neil's hand up. I can't see everybody, but the whole team, I think the entire team is here, also from Uganda and Tanzania, because the study covered the 3 countries. So today's presentation, yes, it is the same presentation that I had done at the launch of the report in April, but we're giving it a slightly different twist. We're asking the question, are we reinventing the wheel, the story of girls' education in East Africa, under the theme, creating impact at the local level for girls, learning from education interventions in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. Ernest, you can leave the slide there, don't change it. And I know on this journey of girls' education, Dr. Karen Hyde in particular was one of the pioneers even globally that contributed to this story of girls' education, also through her technical support for FAWE, regional, global. So really that's global. So I'd really like to recognize her inputs into this. And of course, she's a WERK member as well. I would like to say that though we are talking about this issue of girls' education, our research findings, and this is not a new finding, is consistent with global reports that progress in achieving gender equality and empowerment goals has been slow. It is true in Western Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, it's slower. But even in East Africa, we think things are much better, but we're still not at the level of gender equality, which we talk about. So the question is why? Why is it after so many decades, we are still talking about girls' education? In today's presentation, we are going to argue that maybe we haven't really reflected deeply on connecting the dots. Jaslika will believe in connecting the dots. That is perhaps leading us to reinvent the wheel, because these are issues we've talked about for a very long time. And by reinventing the wheel, we're wasting resources. Reinvention of the wheel, in our view, is partly due to the lack of institutional memory. And also by ignoring existing research on the subject done by Southern scholars that spanned several decades. Southern scholars have been at it for many years, but our research is perhaps not given the same value and status as research by the North. Because it is said that our research, you can find it in the gray literature, what we call also the fugitive literature. And we don't tap, if you are writing a scholarly journal and if you're just depending on, the so-called paywalled journals, they won't look for authoritative sources. And those, unless you've published, they don't really, it's a struggle getting our voices in. We are also going to argue that a number of issues that contemporary scholars, like yourselves, because I think this team today is also an intergenerational team. And we're all still either established scholars, or we are upcoming scholars, or we have aspirations to be scholars. So a number of issues that are being raised today by scholars and advocates that we are saying we've discovered. It's not really new. If we go back to the fugitive literature, we'll find those issues are really not new. So that means draws attention to the fact that we need to dig deeper, create our own space as Southern scholars, and raise and amplify our voices in collaboration with, I know this particular meeting is WERK and Jaslika, but your PAL, you're trying to do that in PAL. We have Dr. Mary Otieno from Kenyatta University and other universities like Jomo Kenyatta University, Professor Margaret Oloko and others. So if we join together to amplify our voices as Southern scholars and also define our own parameters and not take things blindly from the West. For those young people who may not know what we're talking about the South and the North. South, it's not exactly the same. You're talking about countries like ours that we are considered to be developing or underdeveloped. North, we're talking about countries like the US and others. And we know we can do it. We need to dig deeper and not confuse the symptoms of a problem with the underlying causes, the root causes of the problem. So we need to scratch before the surface, because what we have been doing often is just scratching at the surface. And we need to take action and just not talk. And I think our Gen Zs, I salute our Gen Zs, who have shown us the way, that they have shown us and forced us into action. And those of us in the Gen Y generation and Gen X, we need to be a little bit more non-complacent, because they're there and their power, they've shown us action is possible. It has been over 3 decades since the word the girl child was coined. 3 decades, 30 years, over 30 years. At the time, Africa and Asia, more specifically South Asia, which is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and a couple of others, came together to successfully advocate for the recognition of the girl child as a distinct, not only from the boy child, but also from women in terms of the special needs, demands, and evolving capacities. Those of us who were around at the time, we had big dreams. We did research, came up with activities, projects, and programs. We established organizations that we hoped would help us to actualize those dreams. There were vibrant organizations like the League of Kenya Women Voters, Coalition on Violence Against Women, and FIDA, that's for women lawyers. I do remember the powerful women who led them in the 1990s. In the education sector, there was FAWE Regional, and FAWE Kenya was just born, and WERK. The WERK was not really known as WERK at the time. We didn't have the K, but we were WER. At the time, we were not registered, but WERK was very active. These organizations are still there, but the dreams of the 1990s of a more gender equal, more gender transformative world remains elusive. Progress has been painfully slow, including in the education sector, especially for girls living in adversity in urban, informal settlements and pastoralist communities of East Africa, which is the subject of our webinar today. Though we'll find what is going on in the informal settlements and pastoralist communities, there are also pockets within areas that we think are okay, but they're not okay. Before I proceed, I would like my co-presenter, Ernest, to do a quick quiz on Mentee. Ernest, you're there?
Yes, I'm here.
Can you take us through that quiz?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sheila. And I don't know if everyone is familiar with Mentee, mentee.com. If everyone can just type mentee.com in your phone or computer that you're using, and then we type in this code, and then I'll guide you through the questions that are there. So I'll just give you a few seconds to go to mentee.com, and then you type in this code. And then I guide you through the questions, and then we continue with the series. Anyone facing a problem? Or I can see people have already started putting it in. I would like to go to the next question. I don't know if everyone has, okay, 3 people, 4, 5. I'd like at least 30 people before I go to the next question. 7 people, 8.
Ernest?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. So there's a question, how are we doing it? So if you could just go over the process again.
Yeah, if you go to mentee.com and then it will prompt you for a code. This is the code that you enter, 34896983. Then the first question will appear. Then I want to move to the next question after everyone has answered the first question.
Maybe mentee.com, you search the internet.
Yeah, just mentee.com, search mentee.com at the bar.
And Jasmine has also put the link.
Yeah.
Just put the link in the chat.
There's a link in the chat. Then you enter the code. See, 17 people have already done it. So I would like to move to the next question. Okay, the next question is now coming onto your screen. You can fill in. Okay. 4 people, 5 people, 6, 8, 11, 15, 16 people so far, 17. $22 people, 23. Okay. I'll move on to the next question. There it goes. Girls' education is no longer a problem in Kenya because gender parity has been achieved at primary level. Okay. $18 people, 19, 23. Okay, waiting for a few just to pass the half attendees. Okay, I'll go on to the last question. There you go. Giving schoolgirls sanitary pads without giving boys underwear is discriminatory to boys. Good. 4 people. 7, 8, 6. Okay. 20. Yeah. So, okay. 22. Yeah, I think we at least most people have participated in it. So I will go to the first question. Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania have more women than men enrolled in universities. And the results are 15 are saying they disagree, 5 agree, and 1 says that they do not know. So from the
Ernest,
data that,
Sorry.
sorry?
is it possible to see it on screen, the
Yes.
results?
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Yeah, 15 people say they disagree. 1 person doesn't know. Then 4 people said they agree. 15 people disagree, and 4 people agree. So the other questions we'll look at it later, or Dr. Sheila, will look at it later, the results. But I would like to give you some facts about this, and it's in our slide here. And you can see in Kenya universities today, statistics show that there are more men than women. There are no men than women who are enrolled in the universities. And also from Uganda and Tanzania, from some of our partners there, they just sent in the data. They're saying that in Uganda, it's still more male than female who are enrolled in university, and also Tanzania, it's more male than female that are enrolled in the universities. Yeah, so those are the results. I think Dr. Sheila, you can continue into the
Thank
presentation.
you so much. In today's poll, we've had majority disagreeing, which is the correct position, but we still had 4 who agreed. And when we did the same poll, we had this question in the last during the dissemination, the launch of the report. Actually, almost 40% said that there are more women than men. So that was a big surprise to me, given that at that convening, we had people who have been working, practitioners in this sector of girls' education and women's and gender equality sector. And the reason we put this question in, and I'll bring it out later again, is because I usually watch these morning talk shows on TV, on Citizen, KTN, and so on. And one of these talk shows, a member of parliament from Kenya, who has been around for a while, and he very confidently said that there are more women than men, because he was talking on the issue of affirmative action, how that is really not necessary. And he said there are more women than men in the universities. And they were all people, political commentators around that table. And these politicians are policymakers. They did not contradict him. And even the TV host, who is very good on political issues, he did not challenge this member of parliament. And that worried me. And I said, okay, let's see what it is. So it means when a member of parliament who's an influencer makes such statements, what does that mean? That means we are getting fake news in our system. And it has not been fact-checked by the media. We'll come back to these issues later. Now I'd like to go back to the presentation. And for the rest of the presentation, I will touch briefly on the methodology without going too much into details, and present selected findings, and also discuss our analytical framework when we're talking about the findings, to show how we have analyzed certain findings, and then highlight 8 key learnings that emerged from the analysis and share 5 high-level recommendations or call to action. But I hope we're going to have enough time for discussion, because I would really like us to discuss concrete things that we can do without resources and with resources. Some things we can do, like what we are doing today with WERK. Really, it didn't cost either one of us very much, apart from our time and your time to do it. So these things can be done without resources to spread the word. So now back to the study. The buzzword around the issue of girls' education and empowerment has resurfaced in the last couple of years. Feminism, which had become a dirty word. I know for us early feminists, we had to go through a lot. It was considered to be, well, I can think of not nice words, so I will refrain. Gen Z, I know you guys use words very openly. Our generation, we're a little bit shy to use certain words. But feminism had become a dirty word. But now it's coming into vogue. It's becoming popular again. At the same time, there's a pushback in and through the media, whether it is, we're talking about the traditional media like radio, TV, newspapers, or the social media on feminism, on gender equality. There are lots of myths, untrue things, misinformation and disinformation floating around, compounded by inaccurate and poor quality data, whether quantitative or qualitative, or simply missing data. The data that is not disaggregated by sex or gender. So it's very difficult to take action based on that kind of data. So this study was born out of the need to have more accurate information and learning about girls' education taking a historical perspective, especially in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, centering around how diverse stakeholders understand empowering education for girls. We keep on talking about empowering education, and we're implementing programs, many of us. But what does it really mean? What does it mean to them, those who are in this field? What are the underlying barriers to education for girls living in adversity? An issue that we've talked about for a long time. How are these barriers being addressed at the policy and practice levels? And how successful have these efforts been in amplifying Southern voices, especially the voices of girls? The next slide, Ernest, on methodology. So if you look at this slide, I will just quickly take it through. You can see that overall, we used a qualitative research paradigm to guide the research process. And this comprised 4 overlapping data collection strategies. This approach enabled us to get the perspectives of the research participants and to amplify their voices, making them visible even within the research itself. Our sample consisted of over 400 participants, 65% of which were women or girls. So we had a reverse two-third gender rule. We applied that. Drawn from various organizations, and there's some who are present here today. Girls and boys, teachers, school heads, and administrators from various schools, supported by selected civil society organizations. Our sampling was purposive. That is, we deliberately sought them out. And that was partly because our funders, who like to remain anonymous, they wanted us to look at what their grantees were doing, people that they have been funding for this, what have they been doing? And also we had a few who are not part of, the donors had not funded them. So we tried to have a few non-grantees, but majority were grantees or sub-grantees, which means the grantees who are now supporting other smaller community-based organizations to be able to implement their work. And these people were from, as I've said earlier, pastoralist communities and urban informal settlements in the 3 countries. Now, I think the desk review, I'd like to talk a little bit about the desk review, because we used the desk review as a strategy to incorporate the voices of seasoned researchers and girls' education and equality advocates as expressed in their written works, analysis, and arguments. Going back to the 1990s, with a deliberate focus on the African region, we argue that our voices and insights from the global South, especially from the decades before the digital explosion, because digital explosion has enabled even open access, people, uploading on various platforms, research that they'd done earlier. But prior to that, this research had been largely muted. I've talked about the fugitive literature. Hidden in the offices of those who controlled the purse strings, that is, people who commissioned the research, sometimes even governments, just inside their drawers, not even on the shelves. So these research were not made use of, or they were paywalled in exclusive journals, prestigious journals, which the average researcher, especially from our countries, are not able to access because they're very expensive. Sometimes I find some of my things in Amazon being sold. And I wonder, when did they get my permission to sell these things? But the ordinary person is not able to access them. Even I don't have them sometimes. Sometimes we find our thoughts and ideas making their way back into the mainstream discourse driven by the global North or their allies in the South without attribution in reinvented wheels. Because many of the things we talked about are now coming back. And same issues, same perspectives, they're all coming back now. But it is not attributed to us. It's not attributed to somebody like Karen Hyde. It's the works that she did not publish, because she also published actually in very prestigious articles. But those they did not, or the work that they did, or even those have disappeared. So So that is one of the things we did. Then the other thing I'd like to focus on a little bit is the experiential knowledge and insights of the research team members, especially the team leaders, because we've lived experiences of the topic. We have a lot to talk about. So we tapped into our experiential knowledge, which often we don't. In feminist literature, we do, but in the so-called scientific research, we tend to generally so-called objective research, we underplay that. So we argue that this experiential knowledge is a valid source of knowledge, which is consistent with the qualitative study paradigm. The choice of qualitative paradigm is aligned with our analytical framework, we shall explain a bit later. And then we triangulated data from the 5 sources, guided by the analytical framework to generate the findings and key learnings from the study. Ernest, move on to the next slide. To the findings, yes. So go to the first one, which is empowering education for girls. How is it perceived? And before I actually speak to that, let me give a bit of genesis of the girl child. Genesis of the girl child as a valid subject of development has been, the girl child has been a valid subject of development since 1990, when many of those in our meeting today were not even born. The Gen Zs were not born, I think, by that time. And the World Declaration on the Survival, Protection, and Development of Children, Plan of Action spearheaded by UNICEF, singled out the female child as a especially vulnerable group requiring urgent attention. In the education sector, UNESCO-led Jomtien Education for All Declaration in its preamble highlighted gender disparities worldwide in access to primary schooling to the disadvantage of girls. In Article 3, it called for the urgent prioritization of access and improved quality of education for girls and women, and the removal of every obstacle that hampers their active participation, including the elimination of gender stereotyping in education. Girls' rights advocates, largely from Asia and Africa, pushed for identifying girls' needs as distinct from women's needs in the lead up to the Beijing conference in 1995, culminating in the inclusion of the girl child as one of its 12 strategic areas of focus. Those of you who are not familiar with the Beijing Platform for Action, please go take a look at it, because that's really, in a way, our Bible on the issues we're talking about. A large part of the second area of focus and strategic objective highlighted issues relating to girls' education, the Platform for Action, and prior to that, the African Declaration on Platform for Action, which is 1994, reinforced the identity of the girl child as distinct from women with special physical and psychosocial needs and rights that needed to be addressed in taking into consideration her evolving capacity. Fawe coordinated this push as the thematic lead for the African education NGOs, and WERK participated actively in the process and actually did make an impact even in Beijing and later as well. And maybe what I need to say, this difference between the global North and South, the girl child, we had to do a lot of lobbying, spearheaded by Dr. Edagachukia, who I want to recognize, though she's not here, and others, because the North, global North, America did not want the girl child. Europe was not really, they said, no. As long as we talk about women, it's okay. We are talking about the girl, but we know that is not true. So there had to be a lot of lobbying to get it on the agenda of the Beijing platform. So it did not happen without active lobbying, active advocacy. Since then, empowering education for girls has been at the center of discussions, with strong arguments made for its inclusion into the definition of quality education for all. Now, when we did the research, we found 3 perspectives on empowering education for girls. You see the 3 boxes, the 2 boxes with the arrow going up And there's one that is going down, which is the red arrow going down, or maroon arrow going down. So the first perspective with the research participants, we can summarize it by saying there is the holistic education, which is designed for the heart, mind, and the soul. That's what we're talking about, the whole child development, isn't it? Which is for the heart, mind, and the soul. The Jaslika WCD champions who are here, that is what we're talking about when you're going to champion the whole child development. Education that is for the heart, mind, and the soul. It is education that facilitates mindset change. It enables us to think differently, think critically, and the ability to instill wisdom and common sense. So that wisdom has to be there. It's just not about doing things mechanically. And these people said, look, both boys and girls and the intersex child, all of them need it. It is essential for all learners, not only for girls, but it's needed for girls and the boys, holistic education. Let me go to the targeted education, which is the third box. While they said it, a few of them said, okay, this is what we need. But some of them said, we need that, but we also need targeted education for girls or any gender that is falling behind. So they're saying you have to level the playing field. And how? Through curricular changes, pedagogical changes, that is the teaching methodology and all that, and contextual interventions. This targeted education also looks at the girls' special physical, psychosocial, and learning needs. It looks at issues like the property rights, financial literacy, income generation skills. It looks at human rights education and sexual and reproductive health rights, leadership skills. It's flexible and sensitive to the differences. All girls are not the same, as you will see, Ernest will explain in our analytical framework. Specific groups of girls with disabilities, even if you look at the statistics, even the Kenyan statistics, and I'm sure the same for Kenya, Uganda, they're way behind. Mothers, girl mothers, pregnant girls, and there could be other minority groups as well. That is the target. We need holistic education, but we cannot make it gender blind. We also need to look at the special needs, which is very important. But there are those, a minority, thankfully, who talked about the pushback, which I call the pushback of the politics of pushback. So they push back on empowerment and empowering education for girls. They confuse or conflate basic gender equality and empowerment concepts. And maybe we'll talk about that a bit later again. And they conflate issues, misinformation, and myths regarding girls' education and empowerment. And I would maybe to give an example, I think we'll give the examples later, even from the exercise that we did earlier. I will just give one simple example. There's a mix-up between, they will talk about too much empowerment or too much equality, and that's one of the learnings that we'll refer to later. So there's been a pushback. Every time we talk about empowering girls, they'll ask, what about boys? Which is not a bad question to ask, but what about boys? We'll talk about that in the learning section. So there's that pushback, the politics of pushback to silence feminist voices for change. And feminism to me is part of humanism. So if feminists are pushing for that gender equality, so we will talk about that. And I would like to conclude this particular section with two quotations. One is, I have lost it, I think I've lost that quotation, but anyway, I'll read the other quotation by one of the key informants who was telling us, and this refers more to the holistic education and implies the targeted education. they talk about, when talking about girls, I think that having access to a good education is important. It is helpful. And here, when I think about education, I just don't think about, academics. It's really having that whole round kind of education that equips them with all the skills that they need to thrive in the world. An education that gives them confidence, an education that prepares them to play that meaningful role in making decisions that really affect them, their children and others. And I think when talking about girls' education, it is also important to know that girls are not a homogeneous category. There are so many differences among them based on many things, ethnicity, where they come from the socialization process, and so on and so forth. And I think this quotation now leads us to the barriers to girls' education and to our analytical framework. Ernest, go to the next slide. Oh yeah, sorry, just give that quotation there. That's the one I had missed. Yes, I love this quotation by a key informant. A girl has the right to be a child. She has the right to play. She has the right to be human and to dream. And we know, even as we look into the barriers, how their dreams are cut short. And I'd like to repeat, even for many boys, the dream has been cut short. But for girls, the situation is much worse and the reasons are different. So Ernest, go to the next slide and I'll hand over to you to take us through the next question. What are the underlying barriers? And this, we're starting with the analytical framework. Ernest?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sheila. I hope you can see the analytical framework that we were able to use in this study. As you can see, we used an intersectional feminist framework, and intersectionality is a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequalities or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves together and create obstacles that often are not understood among conventional ways of thinking. And this analytical framework actually recognizes that women and girls, the heterogeneity of women and girls, it digs deeper to understand the causes of this marginalization of girls and bringing out the complexity of the situation that is there, and actually showing the lived experiences of girls. As you can see, gender is not in isolation, and from the center, from the heart, you can see that there is gender in the middle, and we need to recognize that all boys and girls are not the same. For example, the president's daughter and someone else's daughter who is below the cadre, they are not the same, and they may not be facing the same problems. For example, even a disabled girl from a poor ethnic background or even in a minority group, they may not be facing the same. They can face the same challenges, but this girl who's disabled and from a minority group faces more challenges than her peers when it's compared to her peers. So you can see that we have these I can call them identity makers, like age, social economical status, religion, disability, and ethnicity. You find that all these are coming together, collectively, and it is affecting girls' access to education. And even if the girl has access to education, the quality of education is not that good. So you can see that um, when you go further, um, as they intersect, it brings a complex layer of exclusion and discrimination to the girl. And even to make it more worse, as you go further, you can see the issues of poverty, you can see the humanitarian crisis, you can remember the floods we just came from also. If you can remember the COVID-19, the floods have been sweeping all the classes, the clashes also in the Rift Valley, even in some parts of Uganda, where we have these fights that affect girls and communities, so they have to move. So girls are more vulnerable in times of crisis, and it's usually increased, and it increases the risk of violence, exploitation, and other barriers that Dr. Sheila will talk about later. And also the issue of patriarchy, and also the politics of development. You know, the government policies, and I usually say the intentionality of the government and the political will. It's very crucial in shaping education. So you can see how all these issues is affecting gender. And in this specific case, we are talking about girls, and especially now in politics of development, no teachers, some schools don't have even classrooms or classes. They don't have resources, books. But even when you go back to the situation that is in the country now, where we have people who want to do renovations using a lot of millions of money, but you can see the suffering that is in education, especially now, maybe classes and resources. So this is the analytical framework that we use, and it's very important because it digs deeper. As Dr. Sheila was saying, it's not on the surface. It's able to bring out the real issues, that the root causes, if I can use that word, of the issues that girls are going through. So I think, yeah, this is the framework that we used. And I don't know if Dr. Sheila has anything to add on this analytical framework. Dr. Sheila, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was
Yeah.
muted. So I'm saying that even as we're talking about the marginalization, it's of girls, and in many cases boys as well, the situation is also underlined by power dynamics. I think that's very important to understand when we're talking about intersectionality and the interrelatedness of factors which create overlapping and interdependent systems of privilege and entitlement for some demographics while discriminating and excluding others. I can see that Dr. Otieno has talked about 15 minutes to complete the presentation. I would beg you give us a little bit, slightly bit more time to finish, because we are now going to look at the barriers. If you can put the thing on barriers, the slide. So I would like to refer to, because our research actually looked at the gray literature. And in the mid-1990s, Fawe, in a background paper to the Interministerial Consultation on Schoolgirl Pregnancy and Dropout, argued that the complex interplay of in and out of school factors combined to exclude girls from participating in school. And in a way, when you look at that framework that Fawe had at the time, it relates to, they don't call it intersectional, but it actually is driving in that direction. We would like to take this bit further, that even after 30 years, some of the in and out of school factors that emerged, they're symptomatic of the deeper underlying barriers. Ernest, can you make it bigger? I don't know whether people are able to see the slide properly. The one on barriers, make it bigger. No. Are you able to magnify it? Okay, I will just continue. Now, in the first column, you have the four under what we call the four underlying factors: patriarchy, poverty, politics of development, and humanitarian crisis. And we say these are the underlying factors, but they're interrelated and they intersect. Now, I'm sorry if you're not able to see clearly. Winnie, are you able to see? Because it's
Yes,
quite...
I can, but I'm not sure if other members. Yes.
Yes, I can see clearly.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I can see, and I'm very short-sighted, so.
Okay, thank you. So here we have taken the out-of-school factors and in-school factors and clustered them according to the underlying barrier, which is patriarchy, poverty, politics of development. Now, if we look at patriarchy, And just look at, well, you can look at both out-of-school factors and in-school factors. And I'd like to, maybe Karen, Dr. Hyde, let me pick on you. When you look at this, is there anything here that you had not talked about in your writing on girls' education or your experience with FAWE? And not only that, in the African region, is there anything here? This is what we found in this research from the key informants and study participants. Is there anything here that you're seeing which was also not identified at that time?
I don't believe so, no.
They're the same.
They're the same, unfortunately, yes.
Yes, that is the sad part of it. They're still the same. We're talking about the same, very same issues when we're looking at the patriarchy. And the patriarchy is an underlying factor. If we look at the poverty, maybe I can pay, Dr. Mandela, I can see you're there. When we look at the issues relating to poverty, if you can see what's there, is there anything that you're seeing that was not there? I know you're younger than my generation, but okay, from the time you started doing your research on girls' education, like the WWW research that you did for FAWE and many others, is there something here under poverty that was not talked about, though we are talking in more recent times?
Dr. Wamahiu, all these listed here are things that we've been talking about time and again, according to my observation.
Thank you. So it is, so I won't take you through everything, but some of the things we can pull out from there is teen pregnancy. We're still talking, we talked about it then. FAWE did a lot of advocacy for the re-entry guidelines for girls at the time. And we just before COVID, there was the government that came out with the re-entry guidelines, which is broader than just pregnant girls and lactating mothers. But these are issues, 30 years we've been talking about these issues. So what perhaps is different then is that we have not emphasized on the politics of development. When we ask the question, why? And by the way, politics of development is not only about the current government, current politics, it goes back to colonial times. When we talk about politics of development and its, let's say, intersection with patriarchy, when we look at patriarchy, we start pointing fingers at traditional cultures. But it's not only about traditional cultures. Patriarchy has also come in from the global north. It came in through colonialism. It came in through the evangelization process. And it's still coming in from other places. And it is there in our everyday lives. But when we start talking about girls' education, we keep on pointing fingers at the retrogressive traditional cultures. And I hate that word, retrogressive traditional cultures, because there's a lot that was positive in those cultures as well. But the intersection of coloniality and traditions have created something that is very negative and also positive in some aspects, but there's also the negative part of it. So this politics of development that we are talking about, and we'll come to it in our key learnings, and I know Dr. Otieno is getting very anxious. I keep on saying we'll come to it. My apologies. But I think this is what has been the missing thing. We have not looked at critically from this perspective of politics of development. If there's poverty, there's hunger or lack of food in the household, right? Why is there lack of food? Why is there hunger in the household? Why is there no school feeding? I remember when I used to be with UNICEF Uganda and we used to have sector-wide meetings. Yeah, and we had the World Bank person there in those meetings would always say, the school is for learning. It's not for feeding children. But how can the children learn if they have no food in the stomach? Even us, those of us who are better, we're advantaged. When I'm fasting as a Muslim, I get so hungry when I'm fasting. Imagine. But this is happening to people day in and day in and day in, and yet we're saying we have no money for that, feeding children in schools, right? I'm just taking one or two examples here. If you're talking about teen pregnancy is the symptom, it's the end of a process. Have we addressed the underlying causes? Have we addressed it to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health education? No, because the churches, not only churches, let me correct myself, the religious lobbies, because it includes the Muslims and the churches, they have refused it without even knowing what is there and how it's better to get kids know about certain things so they don't get pregnant than to get pregnant. And then we are reactive about it. So the re-entry guidelines is reactive, which is good. So just to give a few examples here, what I would also like to point out that even as we look at these barriers, and by the way, we will share the links to the reports with you so you can read it yourself. I would like to summarize this section with 3 points: that not all the identified factors or barriers apply equally or across all contexts. For example, booking of young girls for marriage and FGM are practices that are common in pastoralist communities, but not practiced, very rarely practiced in informal settlements, though in some it's still happening. Some of the listed barriers are not specific to girls, they also affect boys. But, for example, boys are more likely than girls to drop out of school or face disciplinary issues, and they're more susceptible to recruitment into criminal gangs. But the motivations for joining criminal gangs may be different for girls and boys. Girls join criminal gangs, according to the information we have, because their boyfriend is in the gang. So you see, there's that issue as well, and how we deal with it. Not only is the extent to which barriers apply to girls and boys differ, but the implications of these barriers on the participation of each gender in education may also vary. For example, even when an underaged boy is prematurely married off, let's say amongst the Pokot, gender norms are less likely than girls to force him out of school. Similarly, when within the school setting, girls' education as compared to boys' education is more likely to be disrupted through sexual harassment and other forms of gender-based violence perpetrated by both teachers and peers. And here I cannot leave the teachers out. The study found that not only the learners, but teachers as well come into the schools with patriarchal, socio-cultural practices and attitudes, rationalized and reproduced through gender socialization and norms at home and in the community. Gender discriminatory messaging that emanates in both traditional and contemporary cultural practices finds itself in the hidden curriculum within the school setting, frustrating the achievement of the official education goals. These negative attitudes and norms, as reflected in policy formulation, implementation, classroom practices, and teaching learning materials, contribute to the exclusion of girls from the education system, especially those already on the fringes, living and learning in situations of adversity. Okay, so I want to keep to the learnings. There is the interventions. There's a graph which you can look at when you look at the report. But one of the things, Ernest, please move on. There's a graph which I will take only one moment. This is a very small sample, so it is definitely not representative. But given that many of these organizations have been funded by the donor, the funder, and you see their priorities are quite different. You can see like the girl-friendly infrastructure is 4.2, and forever UNICEF advocated for child-friendly schools that includes girl-friendly, disability-friendly infrastructure. Very few of the organizations on the ground. These are the organizations addressing issues of girl-friendly infrastructure. Very few, that is 4.2. Socioeconomic mobility and transition refers to addressing barriers to socioeconomic and career mobility of girls and young women, and facilitating internship and mentorship opportunities. We all talk about it, but it looks like in reality, it's only 4.2%. The highest we see is in the domain of economic empowerment and support. We talk a lot about sexual reproductive health and menstrual hygiene and management. Only 6.3% of those organizations that we focused on. And remember, they're actually working on girls' education and empowerment issues. You can see that's very little, but relatively more are looking at involvement of men and boys. So you can see, this was a bit of a surprise to me. This was a bit of a surprise to me. So very quickly, I will not go into details. Let's take a quick look at the 8 key learning areas, and we will also give you the results of the other things now. So in the learning area 1 is, I've already referred to it, is that the progress has been slow, and I will share with you some sources. This is UNICEF that gives the 3 countries, that's why I picked this, of the out-of-school girls by country. And it is by the age, primary, lower secondary, upper secondary school age. And Kenya seems to be doing better, but in this age and time, should really 11% of girls of this age group be out of school. That is 11%. Tanzania is 81% and Uganda 68%. I don't know, PAL Network, maybe you have data that we can also source to see how your data or even USAWA data compares with this. Because to me, this is very shocking. Next slide, very quickly. Again, it shows the 3 countries. Completion rates. Remember, completion rates is not the same as enrollment rates, right? So completion rates are those who join school and they're completing it. So we need to keep that in mind. And again, primary school completion, this seems to be for Kenya and Tanzania, not too bad, but not 100%. Uganda is much lower. You have lower secondary. And you see, as you go up the ladder, it keeps on reducing. The completion rates keep on reducing. So Kenya, we have reduced to 38% completion rates. This is, again, UNICEF data. Next slide. Ernest, next slide. Now, this is completion rates in Kenya, where we have, you can see there's a difference where we have girls and boys. Girls seem to be doing better until lower primary, lower secondary, but in upper secondary, there's a huge drop for girls. And this is, but remember, if we go, and I will not, I know I was going to give Ernest a bit of chance, but I will not give it because in the interest of time. When we look at the enrollment and we say gender parity, has it been achieved? Even if you take this data at primary, 87% girls and 81 boys, but we still have not, even in Kenya, we have not achieved gender parity at the primary level. I think there was a question like that. And we have not achieved it because we are close to it, but 0.96. But the 0.96 hides the more disaggregated data at the county, at the local level, right? So, and Uganda, Tanzania, it's similar. So some of these, the regional differences, district differences. I think then I will, that was the first learning that no, we have not, yes, progress has been slow. There was some data from Kenya, but I will not give it here in the interest of time. Learning 2, I will just read because if I talk, I take more time, I'll just read. A misunderstanding of fundamental women's and girls' rights concepts like gender equality, equity, and affirmative action frustrates achievement of gender equality in and through education. And it shows that people have a shallow understanding of these concepts. education administrators, teachers, project implementers, and even those who design. While some of the teachers may be well-intentioned, many do not have the knowledge or skills to implement gender-responsive lessons, despite the gender-responsive pedagogy that FAWE has really worked on and supported. And there are also lots of gender biases in the books. We had talked about affirmative action. I won't, Ernest, maybe you can put in the chat what the result was for that one. Just put in the chat, but I'll just continue. That
For which one?
the one on the affirmative action for minority groups. Just put it on the chat. But what I'm trying to say is the learning is we still need affirmative action. We cannot do without it. And affirmative action is supposed to be a short-term measure, not a long permanent thing. It's not supposed to be permanent. Yeah, so luckily here also most people disagree, but there's still who say it lowers standards. It does not lower standard, provided you put in place the mechanisms, support mechanisms for affirmative action. Then I had mentioned the issue of lesson 3, that popular narratives of giving too much empowerment and too much employment, talking about too much equality. You cannot, there's nothing called too much equality. What is too much equality, Dr. Otieno, Mary Otieno? What is too much equality? What does it mean? Is there something called
Oh, Chair, Dr. Sheila, are you asking me a question?
Yes, I am. I'm asking, when people say, oh, girls have been given too much equality, can one really give too much equality? What is too much equality?
Oh, I am not sure whether I am able to answer that, but I think that is more of a perception on the focus that is on girls' affirmative action. You know, the wave of supporting girls is giving an impression that girls, the focus on girls in terms of empowerment is, according to them, is massive. And maybe that.
Oops, I can't hear her. Am I the only one who can't hear her?
No, I can't. I can't hear her either. It just
Okay, I think maybe she has frozen. So maybe let me just say thank you, Dr. Otieno.
Is worried.
Oh, okay, now I can hear you again. You had gone off completely.
Oh, the society is worried. I think that is more of a perception than the true picture on the ground, because of the activities that are going on around the world in terms of affirmative action and supporting girls in all areas. Thank you.
And if indeed there's too much equality, too much inequality is inequality, because equality means this, right? Level. So if you have too much equality, then you go down like this. So you create inequality. So these are really based on not perception, as Dr. Otieno said, but also based on not understanding these terminology properly. And I talked about the pushback, the politics of the pushback, so I will not dwell on it. At its extreme, provoked by popular culture transmitted through multiple communication channels, the consequences are serious. And the sexuality of girls and women are being commodified and commercialized, making them vulnerable to sexual exploitation and insecurity. And conversations on the unjust treatment of girls and women are often silenced through asking the counter question, what about boys? Because it is not, instead of explaining and doing things so situation can change, we are countering, and that's a very defense mechanism. Learning 4, deeply embedded patriarchal mindsets are among the most insidious challenges to the promotion of gender equality in and through education. Though a majority of the organizations participating in the study address patriarchy as a barrier, but they viewed patriarchy to be the preserve of traditional African cultures, overlooking the role of East African colonial history, post-colonial experience, and religious ideologies that shape the mind, influencing, creating, and reproducing gender discriminatory attitudes and practices in and outside the classroom. Number 5, existing policies safeguard girls' right to education and must be owned and enforced by diverse stakeholders to have an impact. And we have a lot of policies and legislation. They're not perfect, but they're well-intentioned, and to some extent safeguard girls' right to education. However, the problem here is with enforcement. Very few, even the chiefs on the ground, even head teachers, we found they don't understand what's in these policies. And even, I mean, it's really pathetic that policies exist, but people who are supposed to enforce and implement them, they don't know. Even those in civil society, many know well, but others don't know. So how can you really implement something that you don't know and understand, and you don't own? Learning 6 is positive attitudes of school leaders reduce the stigma against pregnant schoolgirls and girl mothers and restore the self-confidence. And by this, I mean, there's this thing that, oh, if girls go back to school, they'll corrupt the morals of other girls and they will resist. But what we have found, based now even on our experience, like my personal experience even in Uganda, you find if the school leadership matters a lot in changing the mindsets. If the school leadership's mindset is positive, then the children, we even found boys looking after babies of their classmate so the girls can play. So they took turns to look after the baby. And that is often overlooked. And then I think I talked about the girl-friendly facilities missing for girls, especially those with disabilities and lactating mothers. And even the young teachers don't have spaces for that, safe space. Young teachers are also very vulnerable. So we need to look at that, and given the long commuting distances and so on. And long commuting distances, we take back to the politics of development. Why do they have to commute so far? Why is it that disabled girls and boys have to walk so far to go get to school? And then we wonder why they're not there, and they reach there and the facilities are not friendly towards them. And finally, the girls' education is the business of all, but we let silos prevent us from making progress. It requires, I think this is something we have said, I will not repeat, we've said and said. Now we talk about co-creation, we talk about collaboration, but we still protect our turf, even as civil society organizations. We still protect our turfs. And it's even worse even when you look at working with the government, they're still very, within the ministry, they don't know what hand is doing and what the other hand is doing. Within the same ministry and across ministries. Same thing with civil society, there's space for all of us. Maybe I will stop there because the recommendations, I think we had just 5, but we need urgently to break down the silos with sincerity, not just through talk. We sincerely need to break that down. And finally, we had 5 recommendations, which is revitalize movements for girls' education at all levels. But I want to emphasize that revitalization movement is not created by an exclusive club of people, not by 3 or 4 or 10 NGOs. No, that's not a movement. Movement is what these Gen Zs has shown us how to do it. They're the start of it, but it needs to be sustained. That is a movement. When it involves, it's inclusive, involves everyone, whether in the Twitter X space or physical space. So that's a movement. And under this, we have a number of different recommendations about being intentional and meaningfully involving organizations serving minority groups, but not limited to ethnic and religious minorities and people with disabilities, but going beyond that, like the intersex. And then I'm not going to read the the recommendations, because there are many. So the number 2 is implement adaptive and culturally sensitive approaches that will be effective in challenging entrenched societal norms that pose formidable barriers to girls' education and empowerment by applying also decolonial intersectional frameworks to dig deeper, disseminate the learnings of the study, which is what we are doing, and we're doing it at very little cost, apart from your time. And then promote collaborative actions to break down the silos and look at to build gender transformative capacity of organizations, not just gender sensitive, but gender transformative, and then invest in the process and support systems, targeting vulnerable girls, pregnant girls. Oh, I thought there were 5. It looks like we have 7. Gender analysis of textbooks, which is a very low-hanging fruit that one can collaborate. As Jaslika, we started with it using our own resources, but a lot needs to be done. And then sexuality education is a controversial area of study, but it's a critical gap. And we need to convince those who are blocking it, because we're losing our young people. We are just losing them from the education system. So I think I will stop with that. And 1,000 apologies, Dr. Otieno. I have totally ignored your directives to stop, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Don't worry, don't worry. Thank you so much for the very interesting and detailed presentation.
Can I quickly show we have 4 products from this report. You find them on our website. Ernest, you will write it on the chat, please, or even on the screen. This is stories. These are stories that have been collected by young people. Then we have a full report and a summary report, which you can all download because we believe in free access. And we have a trifold. I think, Dr. Otieno, you already have it, and Sophie has it, and a couple of others. I will give the small trifolds, which is just gives highlights. I'll leave them at work to be picked, whoever wants to pick. The other reports, I'm not sure we have enough copies, but we'll give set to the library. And anybody here who wants to have them in institutional libraries, we will give you sets. So please let us know, Professor Oloko, Dr. Mary Otieno. I know you have different institutions, PAL network, whatever. We are happy to give you sets of the reports. Thank you. So now I'll keep my mouth shut, I promise.
Back to Winnie. Thank you, Daktari. No worries, no worries.
All right,
Winnie,
thank you so much. Yes, Dr. Otieno, are you now on, are you settled on the internet, or we continue? Ernest, if you could put down the screen, please.
Yeah, I'm settled, not settled, but I'm going to move in the next few minutes. I will move to another location, so I might interrupt the conversation. Yeah.
No problem. So as we move to, at least we have some more minutes for conversation. And I know if we were seated in a room, we'd say, we give a round of applause, but, also on Zoom, there is a reactions button. So please feel free to also appreciate the presenters. They've given us lots of information, and you can feel free to also share your feelings, because in addition, I think we are able to share feelings on the reactions buttons. But thank you so much, Dr. Sheila and also Ernest. So we're moving on to our next session, where we'd like to hear from the participants of today. So just going over the chat briefly before we get a chance to speak. We had a few comments that came in while we continued with the presentation. Dr. Rubai Mandela said that's true. Some girls end up facing double or even triple exclusion as a result of intersectionality. They are never a homogeneous group. And you know, just briefly to mention, when we look at the national averages, even when we look at the issues of, say, out of school statistics, for example, the latest Usawa agenda report mentioned that the national average of out of school children was 8.5%. So 1 in 10. I mean, no, 9 in 100. Let me not give wrong. 9 in 10 children actually are enrolled. So 8.5. But when you go down to looking at the gender disaggregated information, there could be some differences there. But, you know, looking at national averages may not give a true picture, especially where we get many issues moving further away from the tarmac, as we would say, or going further into the arid and semi-arid areas. So the exclusions, as long as you go further, or as long as we look at the minority groups, then it becomes different. I saw some interesting finding here. When you look at the out of school, actually, from the Usawa report, there were more boys than girls that were out of school. But when you look at the head of households, so for those children that come from female-headed households, they were more likely to be out of school than those that had male-headed households. So I know it gives us an opportunity to actually think a little bit further about the exclusions, not just looking at the averages, but what are these pockets where there are more issues to actually look at. So thanks for that comment. Mary Minor mentioned that these are insightful findings that translate to the realities in our societies. And we had one question that had come in when Dr. Sheila, you talked about what is too much equality. Might distribution of sanitary towels to girls contribute to the too much equality? I think it would be nice if you give a comment to that. And yeah, that was the question that came. But also, as you comment on that, when you mentioned, or when you're sharing about the innovations, we had quite a high percentage of what you called involvement of men and boys. I think it was the second most, the second highest. I wonder what this actually mean in terms of innovations. What does it mean to have men and boys being involved? If the study also looked at that, I think it would be good to get a little bit more information. So maybe you can comment on those two, as I also invite members to raise their hands so that they can also jump in.
Yes, yeah, I can see that comment from Naum. Yeah, I think she's referring here to the perception that you give sanitary towels to girls and boys feel they're being left out. And I think more importantly, when you give life skills education, you teach girls to be confident, girls to be assertive and say no. Then there's that pushback with the too much equality. I think giving sanitary towels to girls creates the perception that girls are being favored. But giving life skills, developing life skills, and I can see Michael from Tanzania here, but anyway, we have that perception that we are favoring the girls when we give the towels. But when we say life skills, teachers would say these girls have become rude. They're very rude. Or boys will say, oh, if a girl learns to say no is no, then they start getting worried. Girls are supposed to say yes, even when they mean no. You see those issues. And when they say no, they say, oh, this one has too much equality. This one is arrogant. She's got horns on her head, and all kinds of other stereotypes that emerge. So that is what she's referring to is, I think, a perception. On the issue of involvement of boys and girls, I think maybe I would first I would like to say that there's a misconception that boys and girls are only being involved now. If I may go back, because I have institutional memory, when FAWE, and I think maybe FAWE still does that, right from inception, FAWE involved men in the work they were doing, but they could be at the regional level. Men were associate members. They could not be full members, but they could be associate members at the regional level. So for example, the former PS, I think he's passed on now, Karega Mutahi. Professor Karega Mutahi was an associate member. Professor Kabiru Kinanjui was an associate member of FAWE Regional. At WERK, as you know, you've been on the board of WERK Winny, and there's we have George Joroge, I've just seen him here. We have included men in work right from inception. We have never excluded men. But the problem arises when the men take over. That is when the problem arises, because we know that the playing field is still not level. The time for men to be 50-50 in work will be when, in our parliament, we have 50-50 women and men. That is the time I would agree that we have men. We have 50% gender balance, because we're far from it. We know it. I don't have to give more examples. So this more recent trend of involving men and boys has been there. It is not new. As I'm saying, a lot of things are not new. But the difference is now a lot of money is being spent on, let's say, for example, giving underwear to boys, for even advocacy. Some of them are doing a wonderful job, by the way. So many of them do advocacy in support of men, for women. I remember in 1992 when there was the infamous St. Kizito rape and death of girls in school, St. Kizito school. There was a very nice slogan that came up by Femnet, spearheaded by Femnet, called Real Men Support Women. Okay? Now, there are some organizations that are doing that and changing the mindsets, both the men. And as women, our mindsets also need to change. But when you talk to women's rights organizations, the other study I referred to in Burkina Faso and Kenya that Jaslika did, there was that feeling, one, that all this attention, a lot of money that women's groups could access are not available for men. It's easier for the men's organizations to get that money. So that's one thing, that's negative. And then the other thing is, I talked about it, there's something called, okay, maybe I'm misusing it, but there's something called meninism, but it's not the opposite of feminism. The issue is here, what I talked about, the money that's coming in from the very conservative redneck American South and other conservatives who don't believe in gender equality, and they're pumping in money for the pushback. And when you talk to some of these organizations, they don't even understand, but that's where the money is. So you go to where the money is, right? So I think that it's a whole range of issues. But yes, there's some who are doing very good work. I can't see my friends from you. Oh, Laura, you're there. I don't know whether because you're now doing your work in Uganda, is there something you've encountered there, Laura? Laura is a former UNICEF colleague who was in Uganda with me. She's doing her PhD in a very interesting topic. But on this issue, Laura, because you're also the focal person in education for gender responsive pedagogy and the rest, are you able to say something, Laura, on this issue? Maybe she's not hearing me. Okay, I'll just. Oh, there's somebody
no
else.
problem.
Oh,
No,
Sophie, you want to say something, Sophie? I don't know. Oh,
Okay.
maybe it's my Okay.
No
so that-
problem. I'm not able to see Laura or Sophie, but Emmanuel Kithuka says we call it he for
I'm
she.
here, Winnie.
Ah,
Winnie, I'm here.
well, I thought it was a different Sophie. The implementers from Uganda, I think I got it wrong.
No, that was Sophia Yeager, and I thought she had raised her hand, but she hadn't.
Ah, okay.
And
So
Laura
we had Dr. Irene Nyamu who had raised her hand, and I think initially we also had Professor Oloko, though the hand is down. So let's start with Professor Oloko. Did you want to give additions? Yes. Okay.
Good evening once again. Thank you, Winnie, for giving me this opportunity. And thank you so much, Dr. Sheila, for making these profound revelations about girl education. Mine is not really a question. It could be a comment. It could be, I'm just wondering in this space that yes, so much strides have been made into girl education to achieve a level of equality, but not yet. And this is a voice that has continued to be raised since the Beijing time of, those are many years, almost 40 years now. And yet we are still speaking about the same thing. And you remember there's a recent report by World Women something about 2023 or 2022 that said that for us to reach gender equality is going to take us 135 years. I looked at that and I was like, my goodness, this will not happen when I'm still alive. I'll be out of this world. And yet we are actually drumming support for gender parity. And this is so bad to the extent that even the societies that I expected them to have reached gender equality have not. I once attended a conference for women in the US or 2021, and they were talking about inequality in the workplaces. And I thought, my goodness, so we are not just alone. So this is everywhere. I'm just wondering, what is it, the one thing that we can do to bring this equality to almost, at more or less a similar level with the men? Like the statistic you presented, at the lower levels, seems there's so much enrollment. There are more numbers of women enrolled, but as time goes by, most of them drop out and become fewer and fewer. And that is evidence. I think many of us who are in some spaces, you get to certain platforms and you discover that you are either just one or you're just two of you amongst many. It also means that our voices still cannot be heard as much as we want them to be heard because there are fewer women at the top. So I'm just really wondering, how do we continue speaking about one conversation for 40 years and we still can't get there? Is there one thing that probably we need to do, or that button that we need to touch to make us be somewhere and not to wait for this 135 years old? I don't know. I'm just wondering. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you, Prof, for the passionate, question. Let's give Dr. Irene first before Sheila can come.
Okay. First of all, good evening, everyone. My apologies. I actually joined quite late, but I was able to catch most of the presentation. I came in when Sheila had just introduced the study, but I want to congratulate the team, Jaslika and WERK, for putting together this very interesting study. And I think I'm just going to pick up from where Professor Oloko has left. And I want to say that, yes, it does look like a lot of investment has gone into this, conversation, advocacy, programming to empower girls and increase access to education, and not just access to education, but quality education that translates into gender equality. And much as the investment has gone in, one could say, oh, well, there isn't much progress. And we are seeing that not too much has happened as we would have expected. But I think one of the reasons is that if you look at the 1990s, and if you look at the more recent last 5 years or one decade, there has, in my view, been quite a different shift in terms of how we are doing advocacy. And for me, I feel that it has to do a lot more with how the civil society has, the kind of space we occupy. Because in the 1990s, the conversations were quite vibrant, and the civil society was very confident about what their position was in terms of keeping the government and also driving, the agenda in public policy. But we seem to have taken sort of a backseat in what we perceive to be a more democratic space. So one of the things that I would hope that we can pick up as a conversation, and perhaps also think about it as a recommendation, is revitalizing the work of civil society as an advocate, working very closely with media, so that as you empower the girls within the school space, as you interrogate changes in the pedagogical approaches, you're also having a very vibrant group of people who, first of all, understand what the gender issues are within education, and they are also able to carry that messaging, in a much more engaging way, because we seem to have lost ground in terms of that advocacy space. So I'm just reacting to what Professor Oloko was saying, but I also wanted to just comment and say that I'm excited, and congratulations to the team again for the choice of methodology. In my view, adopting an intersectional approach, an intersectionality approach to gender issues is really, really important, because then you are able to analyze the different layers of factors that come together and create an interplay of barriers for young girls and women in terms of making it, to break the barriers and move on towards a more equitable society. And this for me is useful, because then you're not only looking at a few factors, but also combining that with the historical perspective, which has been very, very useful in terms of showing us how much we have moved forward, but also how much things have not changed. And that's also a call to action on our part, to be more accountable with the resources that are actually invested, whether through public funding or even private funding. And so I think for me, it's really just to commend the team on the choice of methodology. And then what is the other thing I wanted to say? Yes, the final point about the analysis that I wanted to also say is that, in addition to an intersectional perspective, I think we may also want to adopt use this idea of a political economy, because when we talk about the development politics, then we are looking at who gets what and who gets to speak in what space. So that I think would be much more powerful when you use it along with intersectionality. So it's just some ideas around the methodology. Otherwise, I am very excited about this. And I think there's a lot for us to take up as advocates and also as researchers moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irene Nyamu. I know time is running out and we'll be coming back to you, Dr. Wamahiu, but Dr. Karine had a hand up. I don't know if you wanted to comment very briefly before we go back to Dr. Wamahiu.
I wanted to respond to Professor Oloku's comments, but I think Dr. Irene has said several of the things I had wanted to say. But this is just sort of a general comment or series of comments to say that if you're interested in this area and working in this area, one of the things that I have found most interesting and illuminating is to think of it not as a national or regional issue, but just as an international issue of gender equality. I mean, Margaret Oloku's talked about being surprised that in the US, they're still struggling with gender issues in the workplace. But it would interest you to know, Sheila and even Lynette, I don't know if she's around or listening, is that one of the most recent initiatives on the London Underground is sexual harassment for commuters. You know, people touching people or using cameras to under things. So these things come back and are international, and we should try and think of it in that way. Also, it'll teach us about the strategies that different countries are using to address those issues. Also, the situation when I first started in this area is, yes, a lot of the same problems exist, but the ground has moved so much further. When I started as a researcher, I was getting pushback just about the fact that girls should go to school. So the very fact that they should have a right to enter a classroom was an issue, was a challenge, was something you had to convince people of. And I think we have moved further beyond that. We're talking now about the quality of the experience in school and what happens afterwards. So I wouldn't be too discouraged, Dr. Oloku or Professor Oloku, that we have made some progress, not enough, but we have not been working in vain. And thank you, Sheila and Ernest, for very, very interesting and insightful presentation and piece of work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And as I hand over for comments from Dr. Wamahiu, I saw that we had a response from Laura. You had asked earlier. So saying that education issues, girls' education issues seem quite the same as 17 years ago when she worked there at UNICEF Uganda, but there are some positive developments. And it's good that also Dr. Karine Hyde is also mentioning the same. And yeah, we can check a little bit more about that. So I'm requesting for maybe 10 more minutes of your time, if you do not mind. And over to you, Dr. Wamahiu.
Thank you so much, Professor Oloku, Irene, and Karen. Irene, I actually recognized you as chair of WERK, but before you arrived. So you'll find my recognition of you as the chair in the recording. Having said that, yeah, I think most of what you've said are observations and they're very valid. It is scary, Professor Oloku, that I definitely will not be around in the next 100 years, let alone 138 years. But it's also, I think, the one thing you said we could do, I'm not sure it's just one thing, but it's a collective of things, but that intersect that we can do. And I would still go back to the Gen Z. They managed to have the finance bill dropped. They've managed to get the MPs to say sorry. Even some have T-shirts saying they're sorry. They've managed to cut down on some expenses of the government. So I think the one thing that we need to do, I think, is it Irene who talked about it? holding ourselves and our leaders accountable. When they're saying there's no money, why is there no money? That why, and why? Because, and also as civil society, I think we went to bed with the government. I mean, that's a general perception. And that is why even the Gen Zs are saying, we don't need you, we can do our own thing. Because they're doing it without support from civil society or any leadership. It's more acephalous kind of leadership. So we can change things if we really stop thinking about if we can hold people accountable, which means starting with ourselves. Can we hold ourselves accountable as well? So that we practice what we preach, because there's a lot of preaching, very little practice that goes on, very little commitment. And we should also look at our own motivations for being in this sector. Is it just a job? Or is it something we sincerely believe in that, and we understand? But I think the mindset change is very important. And if we came together to do that mindset change, to me, that is really the underlying thing. If you're looking at patriarchy, it's a mindset. If you're looking at the politics of development, by the way, Irene, the politics of development, what you're talking about is precisely that's what we're talking about. But we need to do more work around that, because that's what I'm saying. We've talked about patriarchy, we talk about poverty, but we never talk about the politics of development, not development politics, but politics of development. What is it that we do with the resources that we have? That's part of politics of development. What is the agenda that we allow to become the, that we recognize? That is politics of development. Like I say, even the air we breathe is politics of development. So I totally agree with you on that, but there's a lot more work to be done, and linking it to accountability and commitment. Commitment has to be intrinsic. You know, we can't just say it, but it's a process. And yes, Karen, there's a lot we can also learn from outside and what's been happening. There's a overall, when I talked about the pushback is not only in Kenya. It's not only in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. The pushback is global. That pushback is global because you have the far right, okay, that is very conservatives who are taking over the world. Basically, you just saw France. Younger people are voting them in. Unfortunately, the people who claim to be progressive are not doing a good job. So the pushback, it reinforces that pushback and the perceptions that we have. Maybe I will just stop there. But I do appreciate, and we need to look deeper into some of these issues and see how we can collaborate and on what issues we can collaborate on. Yeah. So back to you.
Dr. Otieno?
Thank you, Winnie. I'm sorry, I've been moving from one location to another, so I lost internet. I want to start by thanking Sheila and team in Jaslika for a very, very exploratory research that has awakened the fight against gender disparities. I wanted just to highlight a few things that I had put down. One of them is to say that what Jaslika has presented is telling a story. It is telling a story, and it has provided insights that this team here can actually pick some of the areas and do further research and even programming, because for a very long time, the gender discussion has been going on, but the story of a girl in East Africa is still pointing to the areas, the various dimensions of disparities. And that is something to think about. The other one that I want to say about the presentation is that Sheila and the team have poked into various areas of need for the girls. And this is something that is a pointer to policy makers, the Ministry of Education. And I would urge you that some of those summaries you have done in terms of the booklets, you need to share them to the Ministry of Education. They have a gender desk. Actually, they need to know what is happening if they are serious. Like now, there is an awakening call of doing the right thing. Yeah, so you can drop them there. Then about the narrative, how can we be able to turn around the narrative, the story of the dropout, you know, the story of the poor performance, you know, the transition rate, the story of girls not being recognized in different spaces. How can we turn around the narrative? That is one question I wanted to ask. Whether we change, because I realized your study was really, really good because it went out and it did a lot of qualitative studies, understanding opinions and understanding perceptions, and also, you know, tweaking it in terms of the actual numbers in some of the surveys that you did. So what is the turnaround? What is it that we need to do? How do we pick it from where you have left? So that next time somebody coming to present will come up with a different thing, because your presentation is really, really good. And I am wondering also what WERK is thinking. Dr. Irene, the chair, is here and the vice chair is here. And I know WERK has been in the front line of influencing policy. So where are we going? Because we don't want this very good information to go just like that. And Dr. Sheila has promised to share a lot of information, a lot of resources that has come out of this research. So maybe Sheila, what are your insights in terms of going forward with this? Thank you.
That's a tall order. I think specifically if it's about Jaslika and WERK and a few others, we really need to come together to see what we can do, and we can do easily. We in WERK are in the business of education. That means teachers, right? And how can we influence teachers? I know the TSC is very possessive about their teachers. But, and if you go to TSC, they'll say, oh, we are doing it already. We have gender training, we have this. But what is the quality of that training? So I'm wondering, one way you can influence at that practical level, because if we can get teachers who can then influence the children and the communities going around them, then that would be very substantive. And one of the easy ways to me is the textbooks. Some of those textbooks, even with the revisions, are not good. I'll give one example that I give all the time. We were looking at some textbooks in a project related to the sexual reproductive health literacy. And we just decided, Jaslika, we are not funded for that, to look at it. And one particular textbook that was reprinted 11 or 12 times was both very negative, many negative things on gender, but even more so of people with mental health. And this is KICD approved books, approved 11 or 12 times. So I think we really, really need to look at that. And I think that's very concrete, because the reason I'm saying, when WERK, those days in the 90s, early, mid-90s, we developed stories to make women visible. And then you had what was that? Femnet, and what was the other organization? Anyway, the publishers, you know, like there were books that were, the publishers got to know that there'd be new books printed, okay? So they all rushed and printed books. But then because of the advocacy, solid advocacy of FAWE led by Dr. Eregachukia and others, they said the ministry, they influenced the ministry. Remember, you had people like Karega Mutahi, who was a PS, who was a member of FAWE. You had others. They said no. They called a meeting of publishers. They did a gender audit of the books that had been published but had not reached the market. They did a gender audit, and that gender audit showed, I can't remember the exact statistics, but it was like 70, 80% of the books did not pass the test of gender equality, gender responsiveness. They did not pass the test. So basically what happened is they convened a meeting of the publishers, and that was done by Masheti. Some of you may know Dr. Masheti Masinjila and Professor Wanjiko Kabira. They did the gender audit. And they then said, no, these books cannot be approved. See, that's the pressure we have to put on the ministry and KICD. You cannot approve books. You're saying they have been vetted, but if they had been vetted, they could not have passed. You see? So that's the kind of pressure we have to keep them accountable. Then, you know, there's that very good book on Wango Wamakere. And there were 5 or 6 books that we did. So the publisher said, oh, but you know, you're saying women are missing in these books, but the women were not there. And they said, you mean there were no women in colonial times and pre-colonial times? Is that what you're telling us? So if you don't know, these are the 6 books that were 5 or 6 books that were produced by WERK. And I think, Karen, you remember that. So they gave it to them. And then they're saying, oh, but you know, we've talked about Wango Wamakere, and you know, they portrayed Wango Wamakere very negatively as getting men to carry her, you know, sitting on the back of men and being very dictatorial, blah, blah, blah. So then they said, the publisher said, oh, but they said, no, but this is the wrong history of Wango Wamakere. You have to correct it. They said, but we've spent money. They said, that's not our problem. And then they said, but you know, the author of that book is dead now, so we can't do anything. They said, no, you can do something, because the colonialists have died, and they've said the Wazungus discovered Mount Kenya. Are we going to keep on teaching our children that? We have to counteract mistakes like that, you know. So what the reason I'm giving is, here you had the Ministry of Education, you had FAWE, you had Femnet, you had WERK working together on this issue. That's the kind of collaboration we need, with strong voices. And I think they should also be intergenerational, because we have a lot to learn from these Gen Zs on how to use the X space effectively to be able to do this. I know I'm going over time again. I'll just stop there. But I think I'm just giving that as an example from the past, which you can apply to the present.
Thank you very much. You always have a very rich background and, you know, very rich insights. So I think the team here, the people who are in this meeting can never get tired. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think there are a lot of learnings, and everybody, I hope they have benefited. We want to take this opportunity to welcome the CEO of WERK to give a final remark, closing remark, and I think Sophie has left or something. Okay, so if Sophie is not around, we will ask the chair of WERK to give closing remarks. Dr. Irene, welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Mary Otieno. I want to sincerely appreciate yourself as the chair of the discussions, and also to acknowledge the hard work that Winny, Cheroitich, as the organizing secretary, has put in order to make this seminar fruitful. It's the first seminar since the interim board took over. I would say that we have actually taken quite a bit of time to get it done, and we apologize for that. But I want to believe that it is the beginning of many, many good and informative seminars that we hope to line up for you. And I also want to thank Sheila and the Jaslika team, Ernest and the others, and also thank WERK, the Secretariat, who have been in some ways involved in this study. And we are always happy that members are involved in various aspects of research. And I would like to actually call upon many more members. If you're involved in a study, whether privately or collaboratively or within your institution, and a study that aligns with what is the themes that WERK is focusing on, it would be really a great idea to talk to our organizing secretary and see that we actually create the platform for you to disseminate. Workshops and seminars like this are a very important part of who we are as a WERK, because what has built this organization is the sharing and learning fora that members organize. And through this, we are able to take up advocacy, ideas, and also areas for further research. For example, just looking at what Sheila has presented together with the team, I think we can already see that we need to start documenting, alternative methods of doing research, from a global South perspective. I think that's one of the things that I really enjoyed, listening to them talk about the global South in the global South voice in this gender equality discussion, which has very much been in the fringes because it is considered not to be a mainstream kind of knowledge. And I think the challenge we are receiving is that we need to use experiential learning as part of amplifying the global Southern voice in research that actually contextualizes our experiences. So I think that's a very important thing that we are learning. Secondly, there is a call to action in terms of advocacy. And we need to recall that WERK is actually built, or the success of WERK has been mainly in the area of advocacy. And the fact that we are talking about, we were among the first organizations, together with, of course, FAWE and FEMNET, to start talking about girls' empowerment and the girl child and the need to create an enabling environment for them. So we need to reoccupy that space. And so there's quite a lot of advocacy work around there. Mary was asking, Dr. Mary Otieno was asking, what is it that we need to do? So I think we need to pick up this conversation with the policymakers. I think we have not, we have only started to scratch the surface in terms of disseminating the findings of this study. And I would very much suggest that we may need to think about a seminar, still thinking about this study, but now targeted at policymakers. We've talked about TSC. We need to think about how we bring in the Ministry of Education, but also some of the donors who are actually funding education program for girls, and really start thinking about how do we improve or examine the kind of interventions and what ways can we improve on the design so that moving forward we see greater improvements in terms of the impact, and also bringing to bear transformative ideas into those projects that they're actually funding. So for me, it is really a challenge that I want to throw to our members to get more involved, to bring on board other ideas and for us to perhaps think about another series of policy dialogues with policymakers. And I want to thank everyone who has been part of this conversation. And I sincerely wish you a great evening, and I look forward to the next conversation. But for the committee, the board committee that Winny Cheroitich is leading, we need to take up some of these discussions and see what we carry forward to the policy dialogue. So thank you very much. And over to you, Dr. Otieno.
Thank you, Chair, and very well said. I would like now to thank everyone as I turn the baton to Winnie. That thank you for attending, and this has made a really big start for us in this season as an organization. And welcome again next time. Yes, Winnie, the baton is back to you.
Thank you so much. And I would not like to dilute, what has been shared even as we close. But I've shared a few links that you can get the report with, but also feel free to reach out by sending an email to info@werk.co.ke. And for Dr. Wamahiu, please also share the details of the upcoming webinar with Dina, and I think she'll be able to share with the rest of the members. And we really appreciate your participation today. Looking forward to more interactive sessions in the future. And thank you so much for giving us a little more time. We will hopefully be on time in the next series, especially starting on time. We had a small challenge at the beginning, but we appreciate that you have stayed with us up to this moment. And we know that it's a Friday, so enjoy the weekend, and we interact more in the coming sessions. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you and
Bye.
bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Winnie.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Goodbye, Dr.
Bye bye,
Sheila.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Have a good evening.
Bye bye.
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 Dina, you can stop the recording. Dr. Wamahiu, please also confirm if we can get the slides to the participants. I think it would be good.
Yeah, I can, even the write-up.
Okay.
I'll just do the write-up with the slides.